In March 2024, the DEA prepared to intercept what they believed was $34 million in cartel cash moving through Arizona. When they arrived at the designated checkpoint, they found an empty truck and a paper trail that led nowhere. One man had executed the perfect heist in broad daylight, stealing from both the cartel and the federal government in a single operation. Deputy Logan Reed, a trusted county sheriff's officer who had spent 15 years building the perfect reputation to pull off the perfect crime. Before I walk you through the full story, I just have a small favor to ask. Make sure to subscribe to the channel, hit that like button, and let me know in the comments. What city are you watching from? It's always amazing to see how far this audience is reaching. The call came in at 6:47 a.m. on March 15, 2024. DEA agent Patricia Vasquez received an encrypted message from an informant embedded deep within the Sinaloa cartel's Arizona operations. The intel was specific. A Peterbilt truck with Texas plates would be crossing through Yuma County within 72 hours, carrying approximately $34 million in cash from tobacco front operations across the Southwest. Agent Vasquez had been tracking this particular money route for 18 months. The cartel had been using legitimate tobacco distributors as cover, collecting cash from street-level dealers and funneling it through a network of shell companies before shipping it south to Mexico. This truck represented the largest single seizure opportunity in the region's history. The DEA's Phoenix field office immediately activated their interdiction protocol. Surveillance teams were positioned along Interstate 8, helicopter support was arranged, and coordination meetings were scheduled with Customs and Border Protection. Everything was planned to the minute. The intercept would happen at mile marker 23, just east of Yuma, where multiple agencies could converge without alerting the cartel to their presence. But when the Joint Task Force arrived at 4:30 a.m. on March 18th, they found something unprecedented. Fresh tire tracks leading away from the highway and a notation in the CBP database indicating the truck had already been processed by county authorities. The entry showed a timestamp of 4:14 a.m., just 16 minutes before the federal intercept was scheduled to begin. Agent Vasquez immediately contacted the Yuma County Sheriff's Office. The dispatcher had no record of any traffic stop or seizure in that area. The duty sergeant confirmed that no deputies had been assigned to that section of highway. Yet the database clearly showed an official county seizure had taken place, complete with proper authorization codes and routing information. The truck itself had vanished entirely. GPS tracking showed it had left the highway at mile marker 17, but after that, the signal went dead. This wasn't unusual for rural Arizona, where cellular coverage could be spotty, but it raised immediate red flags. The DEA had been tracking this vehicle for 3 days, and it had never gone offline for more than 20 minutes. 72 hours later, the truck reappeared at the original border crossing in Nogales. The driver, a 45-year-old man named Carlos Mendez, presented his documentation to CBP officers as if nothing had happened. When questioned about the 3-day delay, he claimed mechanical problems and showed receipts from a truck stop in Tucson. The paperwork looked legitimate, but something felt wrong. CBP officers conducted a full inspection of the vehicle. The seals were intact, the cargo manifest matched the contents, and the truck showed no signs of tampering. But when they weighed the trailer, they discovered a discrepancy. The truck was carrying exactly the same weight it had when it entered the United States, but internal sensors revealed the weight distribution had changed significantly. The investigation team decided to open the sealed containers. Inside, they found tobacco products exactly as declared on the manifest. But hidden within the cargo, they discovered evidence of a sophisticated operation. Lead bricks and compressed cardboard had been carefully arranged to match the weight and dimensions of what should have been millions of dollars in cash. The estimated loss was staggering. Based on the cartel's own accounting methods, intercepted through electronic surveillance, the truck had been carrying approximately $34 million in various denominations. The money had been packed in waterproof containers, hidden within legitimate tobacco shipments, and secured with multiple layers of protection. But the money was gone, and the only clue was a single database entry showing that Deputy Logan Reed of the Yuma County Sheriff's Office had initiated a traffic stop at mile marker 17 at exactly 4:14 a.m. on March 18th. Logan Reed had been waiting in the darkness for over 3 hours when the Peterbilt truck's headlights finally appeared on the horizon. Positioned at mile marker 17, he was technically outside the DEA's operational zone, but still within the corridor where the truck was expected to pass. At 4:14 a.m., he activated his emergency lights and pulled the truck over. The location was perfect for Reed's purposes. Mile marker 17 sat in what law enforcement called a dead zone, an area where cellular coverage was poor and radio communication with dispatch was often unreliable. More importantly, it was just far enough from the federal intercept point to avoid immediate detection, but close enough that his presence wouldn't raise suspicions from other agencies monitoring the area. Reed approached the driver's side of the truck with practiced professionalism. Carlos Mendez, the driver, was nervous but cooperative. He handed over his commercial driver's license, vehicle registration, and shipping manifest without hesitation. Everything appeared to be in order, but Reed had already decided this stop would be different. "Sir, I'm showing a weight discrepancy in our database," Reed told Mendez. "State Transportation Authority flagged your truck for a safety inspection. I'm going to need you to follow me to our certified weighing facility." This was the first lie, but it was delivered with such authority that Mendez never questioned it. Reed had spent months studying the language and procedures used by various law enforcement agencies. He knew exactly how to sound official while providing information that couldn't be easily verified in the moment. Reed directed Mendez to follow his patrol vehicle to what he described as Secure Lab Logistics, a facility he claimed was contracted by the county for specialized vehicle inspections. The route took them off the main highway onto a series of back roads that led toward the small town of Tacna. Mendez followed, believing he was cooperating with a routine inspection. The facility itself was located in a small industrial park that had seen better days. Several warehouses sat empty, their parking lots cracked and overgrown with desert vegetation. Secure Lab Logistics occupied a corner building that looked legitimate enough from the outside: proper signage, security cameras, and a chain-link fence surrounding the property. Reed used a keycard to open the main gate and directed Mendez to park the truck in a designated bay. The interior of the facility was sparse but professional-looking. Metal tables, computer terminals, and various pieces of equipment that could plausibly be used for vehicle inspection. Most importantly, there were no other employees present, which Reed explained was normal for overnight operations. "Standard procedure," Reed told Mendez. "We'll need to conduct a full inspection of your cargo. This facility is certified by both state and federal authorities for handling commercial shipments. You'll need to sign an impound release, and we'll have you back on the road within 24 hours. The impound release was a masterpiece of bureaucratic deception. Reed had spent considerable time creating a form that looked official, but wasn't connected to any legitimate government database. It included proper legal language, official-sounding reference numbers, and spaces for multiple signatures and dates. Mendez signed without reading the fine print, which included clauses giving authorized personnel broad access to the vehicle and its contents. Reed then called for what he described as a transport service to take Mendez to a nearby motel. This service was actually a legitimate taxi company, but Reed had arranged for the driver to be paid in cash and told that this was a routine service for drivers whose vehicles were being inspected overnight. Mendez was given a business card for Secure Lab Logistics and told to call a specific number the next day for updates on his vehicle's status. Once Mendez was gone, Reed began the most critical phase of his operation. He had exactly 36 hours to strip the truck of its hidden cargo, replace it with substitute materials, and return everything to its original appearance. This window had been carefully calculated based on the typical duration of legitimate inspections and the time it would take for federal agencies to realize something was wrong. The truck's GPS tracking device had been disabled using a commercial signal jammer, a device that Reed had purchased months earlier under the guise of testing security protocols for the sheriff's office. The jammer was powerful enough to block all satellite communication within a quarter-mile radius, effectively making the truck invisible to any tracking systems. Reed had prepared for this moment for over a year. He had studied the cartel's operations, learned their methods for concealing cash, and developed detailed plans for accessing and removing their hidden compartments. The tobacco cargo was legitimate, but hidden within specially modified shipping containers were vacuum-sealed packages containing millions of dollars in various denominations. Working alone, Reed spent the next 18 hours methodically removing the cash and replacing it with carefully prepared substitutes. Lead bricks were wrapped in plastic to match the weight of currency bundles. Compressed cardboard was shaped and packaged to fill the exact dimensions of the hidden compartments. Even the shipping container's seals were replaced with identical copies that Reed had obtained through a contact in the trucking industry. The precision of the operation was remarkable. Reed had to account for every ounce of weight, every dimension, and every security feature. The cartel's money was protected by multiple layers of concealment, but Reed had studied their methods extensively. He knew where to look and how to access the hidden compartments without leaving obvious traces. By the time Reed finished, the truck appeared exactly as it had when it arrived. The cargo manifest matched the contents, the seals looked untouched, and the weight distribution was perfectly balanced. Only the most sophisticated inspection would reveal that the truck was now carrying approximately $34 million less than when it had entered the facility. The money itself was packed into military-grade storage containers and loaded into an unmarked utility trailer that Reed had parked behind the facility. This trailer would later be driven to a remote location in the desert, where the cash would be transferred to a more permanent hiding place. Reed's final task was to prepare the truck for its return to the highway. He cleaned the interior, checked all the seals, and verified that nothing looked out of place. The truck would be returned to Mendez with a completed inspection report and an apology for the delay. From the driver's perspective, nothing unusual had happened, just a routine inspection that took longer than expected. Logan Reed was not the type of person who typically attracted attention. At 39 years old, he had spent 15 years in law enforcement, first as a military police officer in the Army, and later as a deputy sheriff in Yuma County. His personnel file was clean, his performance reviews were consistently positive, and his colleagues regarded him as reliable and professional. But Reed had always been interested in the spaces between official procedures. During his time in the military, he had specialized in logistics and supply chain management. He understood how goods moved through complex systems, how paperwork created trails, and how those trails could be manipulated by someone who understood the underlying processes. When Reed joined the Yuma County Sheriff's Office in 2015, he quickly established himself as the department's expert on evidence handling and chain of custody procedures. He volunteered for additional training, attended conferences on forensic protocols, and became certified in multiple areas of evidence management. His supervisors appreciated his attention to detail and his willingness to handle complex cases that other deputies found tedious. Reed's expertise in paperwork and procedures made him valuable to the department, but it also gave him unique insights into the vulnerabilities of the system. He understood how evidence moved through the bureaucracy, how different agencies communicated with each other, and where gaps in oversight created opportunities for manipulation. Over the years, Reed had noticed increasing friction between local law enforcement and federal agencies. The DEA, CBP, and other federal organizations often operated in Yuma County without sharing information with local authorities. This created resentment among local officers who felt they were being kept out of significant operations in their own jurisdiction. Reed had experienced this frustration personally. In 2019, he had developed intelligence about a major drug trafficking operation, but when he tried to share it with federal authorities, he was told that the information was outside his jurisdiction. The federal agencies ultimately conducted their own investigation and made several arrests, but Reed received no credit for his contribution. This experience left Reed with a sense that the federal system was fundamentally unfair to local law enforcement. He began to view federal agencies as competitors rather than partners, and he started looking for ways to level the playing field. His military background had taught him to identify and exploit weaknesses in complex systems, and he began applying these skills to his understanding of interagency cooperation. Reed's transformation from frustrated deputy to criminal mastermind was gradual and methodical. He began by studying the cartel's operations in his area, not to arrest them, but to understand their methods. He learned about their transportation routes, their security procedures, and their methods for avoiding detection. He realized that the cartels were sophisticated organizations with well-developed systems for moving money and drugs across borders. The key insight that led to Reed's eventual crime was his understanding of the blind zone that existed between initial seizure and formal federal processing. When local law enforcement stopped suspected cartel vehicles, there was often a period of several hours or days before federal agencies took control of the case. During this time, the evidence was supposedly secure, but the oversight was minimal. Reed began to experiment with this blind zone. He would initiate traffic stops on vehicles that he suspected were connected to cartel operations. But instead of immediately reporting them to federal agencies, he would process them through his own procedures. He created forms, filing systems, and protocols that looked official but were actually under his complete control. The first time Reed tested his system, he stopped a vehicle carrying a relatively small amount of cash, about $50,000. He processed the stop through his fake procedures, held the vehicle for 24 hours, and then released it without seizing the money. He wanted to see if anyone would notice the gap in the official record. No one did. Over the next 2 years, Reed refined his methods. He created Secure Lab Logistics as a legitimate business entity, complete with proper registration and tax filings. He established relationships with vendors who could provide materials and services without asking too many questions. He developed detailed procedures for handling vehicles and cargo that looked professional but were actually designed to facilitate theft. Reed's success depended on his reputation within the law enforcement community. Because he was known as a reliable and professional officer, his reports and procedures were rarely questioned. When he claimed that a vehicle was being processed through county procedures, dispatchers and supervisors assumed that he was following proper protocols. The planning for the $34 million heist began in early 2023 when Reed first learned about the cartel's tobacco front operations. He realized that this represented an opportunity unlike anything he had previously encountered. The money was moving through his jurisdiction, but federal agencies were planning to intercept it. If Reed could get to the truck first, he could potentially seize the entire shipment before federal authorities even knew it was missing. Reed spent months preparing for this operation. He studied the cartel's route, identified the optimal intercept point, and developed detailed procedures for processing the truck. He purchased equipment, arranged for support services, and created multiple layers of deception to hide his activities from other law enforcement agencies. The most challenging aspect of Reed's planning was timing. He needed to intercept the truck after it had been detected by federal agencies, but before they could act on their intelligence. This required him to have access to federal communications and planning documents, which he obtained through his legitimate law enforcement connections. Reed's position as a deputy sheriff gave him access to various interagency communication systems. He could monitor federal operations without raising suspicions, and he could time his own activities to avoid detection. The key was to act decisively when the opportunity presented itself, and to have all the supporting infrastructure in place before the operation began. The phone call that changed everything came on a Tuesday morning in late February 2024. Logan Reed was sitting in his patrol car monitoring traffic on Interstate 8 when his personal satellite phone buzzed with an incoming call. The device was a ruggedized model designed for military use, and Reed had purchased it specifically for situations where he needed secure communication outside normal law enforcement channels. The caller's voice was distorted by electronic modulation, but the accent was clearly Mexican. The person spoke perfect English, but with the careful precision of someone for whom it was a second language. What made the call remarkable wasn't just the information it contained, but the level of detail that suggested the caller had access to highly classified cartel operations. "Deputy Reed," the voice said, "I believe you have an interest in intercepting certain shipments that pass through your jurisdiction. I have information about a truck that will be carrying a substantial amount of cash through Yuma County in approximately 3 weeks." Reed's first instinct was to assume this was some kind of test or setup. Federal agencies occasionally used elaborate schemes to test the loyalty of local law enforcement officers, and Reed had heard stories of deputies who had been caught in such operations. But as the caller continued, providing specific details about routes, vehicles, and timing, Reed began to realize this was something different. The caller provided the truck's license plate number, the driver's name, and even details about the hidden compartments where the money was stored. More importantly, the caller seemed to know about federal plans to intercept the truck, and was offering Reed an opportunity to act first. "The federal agencies plan to stop this truck at mile marker 23, the caller explained. "They will be in position at 4:30 a.m. on March 18th. If you were to intercept the truck at mile marker 17 at 4:14 a.m., you would have a 16-minute head start. More than enough time to redirect the truck to your own facility." Reed was stunned by the specificity of the information. The caller knew details about federal operations that should have been classified at the highest levels. This suggested that the cartel had sources within federal law enforcement agencies, or that they had sophisticated surveillance capabilities that allowed them to monitor federal communications. But the most shocking revelation came at the end of the call. The caller explained that this was not a random tip, but part of a larger operation. The cartel was planning to sacrifice this shipment as part of a strategy to identify and eliminate law enforcement officers who could be compromised. "We know that some officers in your area have been stealing from us," the caller said. "This truck is a test. We want to see who takes the bait. If you choose to intercept this shipment, you will be providing us with valuable information about corruption in local law enforcement." Reed realized he was being offered a choice between two equally dangerous options. He could ignore the tip and allow federal agencies to seize the money, which would mean missing out on the largest score of his career. Or he could take the bait and risk exposing himself to cartel retaliation. But Reed had been planning his own operation for months, and he believed he could outsmart both the cartel and federal law enforcement. He decided to accept the challenge, but with his own twist. He would steal the money not just from the cartel, but from everyone involved in the operation. Reed spent the next 2 weeks conducting his own surveillance of the truck and its route. He confirmed that the caller's information was accurate in every detail. The truck was indeed carrying a massive amount of cash. Federal agencies were planning an intercept, and the timing was exactly as described. But Reed also discovered something the caller hadn't mentioned. The truck was equipped with multiple tracking devices, including several that were not connected to any law enforcement database. This suggested that the cartel was conducting its own surveillance of the shipment, possibly to monitor exactly what happened during the intercept. Reed realized that the cartel's plan was more sophisticated than he had initially understood. They weren't just testing local law enforcement for corruption, they were gathering intelligence about federal operations. The truck was essentially a mobile intelligence gathering platform designed to reveal the methods and capabilities of various law enforcement agencies. This discovery led Reed to develop a more elaborate plan. He would not only steal the money, but he would also manipulate the intelligence gathering operation to his own advantage. He would provide the cartel with false information about federal capabilities while simultaneously covering his own tracks. The key to Reed's strategy was his understanding of the technological aspects of the operation. He knew that the truck's tracking devices were sophisticated, but he also knew their limitations. By using signal jammers and other electronic countermeasures, he could create gaps in the surveillance that would be difficult to explain. Reed also realized that the caller's knowledge of federal operations created an opportunity for him to access even more sensitive information. By pretending to be interested in the cartel's intelligence gathering operation, he could potentially learn about other shipments and opportunities. Over the following weeks, Reed maintained contact with his mysterious caller. He provided updates on federal activities in his area, shared information about law enforcement procedures, and gradually built a relationship that gave him access to increasingly detailed intelligence about cartel operations. The caller seemed pleased with Reed's cooperation and began sharing information about other shipments and routes. Reed learned about the cartel's entire financial network in Arizona, including details about money laundering operations, storage facilities, and transportation methods. But Reed never revealed his true intentions. As far as the caller knew, Reed was a corrupt deputy sheriff who was willing to steal money but lacked the sophistication to threaten larger cartel operations. This perception allowed Reed to maintain his access to intelligence while planning an operation that would ultimately betray everyone involved. The success of Logan Reed's operation depended entirely on his ability to manipulate the official record of the truck's seizure. He had spent months studying the various databases and communication systems used by law enforcement agencies, and he had identified several critical vulnerabilities that could be exploited. The first challenge was creating a plausible justification for stopping the truck. Reed couldn't simply claim it was a random traffic stop, because federal agencies would immediately question why he had been in that specific location at that specific time. He needed a bureaucratic reason that would stand up to initial scrutiny but wouldn't trigger deeper investigation. Reed's solution was to exploit a little-known provision in Arizona state law that allowed county sheriffs to conduct commercial vehicle safety inspections on trucks that appeared to be overweight or mechanically unsafe. This law had been designed to give local authorities the power to remove dangerous vehicles from the road before they could cause accidents. The key to Reed's deception was the timing. He initiated the traffic stop at 4:14 a.m., just 16 minutes before the federal intercept was scheduled to begin. This gave him a legitimate reason to be in the area, but it also meant that his actions would be hidden in the confusion that followed when federal agencies discovered the truck was missing. Reed used his patrol car's mobile data terminal to create an official record of the stop. The entry showed that he had stopped the truck for a routine commercial vehicle inspection and had identified potential safety violations that required the truck to be removed from the road for further evaluation. The beauty of Reed's system was that it used legitimate law enforcement procedures, but applied them in a way that created gaps in oversight. Commercial vehicle inspections were typically handled by state agencies, but county sheriffs had the authority to initiate them in emergency situations. Reed's stop appeared to be a legitimate exercise of this authority. Reed's next step was to create a custody chain that would explain why the truck had been removed from the highway. He used a form called a temporary custody order that was designed for situations where law enforcement needed to impound vehicles pending further investigation. The form itself was legitimate, but Reed had modified it to include references to Secure Lab Logistics as an authorized processing facility. This designation was crucial because it gave Reed the legal authority to move the truck to his own facility without raising immediate suspicions. Reed had spent considerable time researching the legal requirements for evidence processing facilities. He knew that law enforcement agencies often contracted with private companies to handle specialized tasks like vehicle inspections, chemical analysis, and secure storage. By positioning Secure Lab Logistics as one of these contractors, Reed created a plausible explanation for why the truck had been moved to his facility. The paperwork for the custody transfer was meticulously prepared. Reed had created forms that looked official and included proper legal language, but the key details were fabricated. The signatures were forged, the authorization numbers were fictional, and the facility credentials were completely false. Reed's most clever innovation was his use of administrative override procedures. Most law enforcement databases included provisions for emergency situations where normal procedures couldn't be followed. These overrides were designed to prevent bureaucratic delays from interfering with urgent law enforcement operations. Reed used these override procedures to enter the truck's seizure into the system without triggering normal verification processes. The database accepted his entries because they included proper authorization codes, but the codes themselves were never checked against any external database. This created a crucial window of opportunity. The truck's seizure was officially recorded in the system, which meant that federal agencies would see that it had been processed by county authorities. But the details of the seizure were never transmitted to federal databases, which meant that no one outside Reed's immediate control had access to the complete record. Reed had also prepared for the possibility that federal agencies would try to contact him directly about the seizure. He had programmed his radio and phone systems to route calls through an automated system that would provide basic information about the truck's status without revealing any details about its actual location. The automated system was designed to sound official and professional. Callers would hear a recorded message explaining that the truck was being processed through county procedures and that additional information would be available within 48 hours. This bought Reed the time he needed to complete his operation, without raising immediate alarms. Reed's understanding of interagency communication protocols was crucial to his success. He knew that federal agencies often experienced delays when trying to coordinate with local authorities, and he exploited these normal inefficiencies to hide his own activities. The DEA, CBP, and other federal agencies had sophisticated systems for tracking vehicles and shipments, but these systems were designed to work within normal bureaucratic procedures. When Reed created his own parallel system, he effectively made the truck invisible to federal oversight. Reed's alternate route was not just a physical detour from the highway, it was a complete bypass of the normal law enforcement system. By the time federal agencies realized what had happened, the truck had already been processed through Reed's facility and was ready to be returned to its original route. The final element of Reed's deception was his preparation for the truck's return to the highway. He had planned every detail of how the truck would be released back to its driver, including the paperwork that would explain the delay and the procedures that would return it to the normal transportation system. Secure Lab Logistics existed in a carefully constructed gray area between legitimate business and elaborate fraud. Located in an industrial park outside Tacna, Arizona, the facility appeared to be a standard commercial warehouse from the outside, complete with proper signage, security cameras, and a chain-link fence. But inside, it was a masterpiece of deception designed specifically for Logan Reed's criminal operation. The building itself had a complex history that Reed had exploited to his advantage. Originally constructed in 2015 as a food processing facility, it had been foreclosed on in 2018 when the original owner defaulted on his loans. The property sat empty for several years, during which time Reed had quietly purchased it through a series of shell companies and legal maneuvers. Reed's acquisition of the property was a lesson in bureaucratic manipulation. He had created a network of fictional business entities, each with proper legal registration and tax identification numbers. These companies existed only on paper, but they provided the legal framework needed to purchase real estate and establish legitimate business operations. The renovation of the facility took Reed nearly 2 years to complete, working mostly on weekends and during his off-duty hours. He had to be careful not to attract attention from neighbors or local authorities, So he presented the renovation as preparation for a legitimate evidence processing business that would serve law enforcement agencies throughout Arizona. Reed's cover story was sophisticated and believable. He claimed to be developing a private company that would handle evidence processing for smaller law enforcement agencies that couldn't afford their own facilities. This was a real need in rural Arizona, where county sheriffs often had to transport evidence hundreds of miles to reach proper processing facilities. The interior of Secure Lab Logistics was designed to look like a legitimate evidence processing facility. Reed had studied the layouts and procedures of real facilities, and he had replicated their appearance down to the smallest details. The main floor included evidence processing tables, secure storage areas, and computer workstations that could plausibly be used for inventory and chain of custody documentation. Reed had purchased most of the equipment through legitimate channels, often using his law enforcement credentials to obtain discounts from suppliers. He had bought evidence tags, seal printers, storage containers, and other materials that were commonly used in real evidence processing facilities. From the outside, everything looked completely legitimate. But the facility's true purpose was revealed in the details that weren't visible to casual observers. Reed had installed industrial-grade scales that could weigh objects down to the gram, allowing him to precisely match the weight of materials he was removing and replacing. He had sophisticated packaging equipment that could create seals and labels indistinguishable from those used by legitimate shippers. The most crucial element of Reed's operation was his system for handling the actual cash. He had created a secure area within the facility where he could process large amounts of currency without leaving traces. This area included currency counting machines, vacuum sealing equipment, and storage containers designed to protect money from moisture and other environmental factors. Reed's plan for the $34 million heist required him to work alone for an extended period. He had to remove the cash from the truck's hidden compartments, count and package it for storage, and then replace it with substitute materials that would pass casual inspection. The substitute materials were the result of months of experimentation. Reed had tested various combinations of lead bricks, compressed cardboard, and other materials to find the perfect balance of weight and size. He had even created fake currency bundles using real money on the outside and worthless paper on the inside as insurance in case of detailed inspection. The process of emptying and refilling the truck took Reed nearly 18 hours of continuous work. His military training in logistics and supply chain management proved invaluable, allowing him to approach the task with methodical precision. The most challenging aspect was maintaining the truck's seals and security features without leaving any traces. The truck's return to the highway was perhaps the most delicate phase of Logan Reed's entire operation. After 36 hours at Secure Lab Logistics, the vehicle needed to be seamlessly reintegrated into the normal flow of commerce without raising any suspicions. At 6:30 a.m. on March 20th, Reed drove the truck to a rest area 8 miles from the original intercept point. He had prepared an elaborate cover story explaining the truck had been subjected to a routine commercial vehicle inspection that revealed minor safety violations requiring overnight repair. The paperwork supporting this story was comprehensive, including inspection reports, repair invoices, and certification documents. Reed had even used staged photography to document the truck's repair process, taking dozens of photos showing various stages of the supposed mechanical work. When driver Carlos Mendez arrived to retrieve his truck, Reed presented him with a folder containing all the documentation. Mendez accepted the explanation without question, eager to complete his delivery. Reed used his patrol car's mobile data terminal to create an official record showing the truck had been released from county custody. The substitute materials Reed had placed in the truck's hidden compartments were designed to pass multiple levels of inspection. They had the correct weight, size, and even texture to feel like bundles of cash. More importantly, they were packaged in identical containers using the same seals and security features that had protected the original cargo.